Hello everyone and welcome to LewisFiction and welcome to the MCU if it was the Arrowverse. So you guys really enjoyed my What If Spider-Man Was a CW show where I took Tom Holland's Spider-Man as a base and expanded it into what it would be if it was a CW show like The Flash and Arrow. So that gave me the idea, what if the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe was like the Arrowverse? What would it look like and how would it play out? In this video, I'm going to be using the MCU as a baseline for inspiration for the stories, crossover events, and character decisions for this version of the MCU in the form of the CW Arrowverse. So without further ado, let's get into this. The first show in the place of Arrow running from 2012 to 2020 will be Iron Man. Of course, Iron Man kickstarted the MCU, so it's only right that he kickstarts what will be now known as the Ironverse. Season 1 premieres in 2012 with the Mandarin as the main villain, who will also return several times throughout the series in crossover events and just generally throughout the rest of the series as well. The show will largely follow Tony Stark on his journey of moving away from the weapons of self-destruction which plagued his life in the early days. And also similar to Oliver Queen, Tony was a party animal until he realised that his life could be better used for helping people of his city, when the weapons of mass destruction his company Stark Industries produced were caught in the wrong hands. Similar to Arrow, the Iron Man show will also have other wider Marvel villains appear that aren't necessarily directly linked to Iron Man himself, like Victor Von Doom. Of course, other classic Iron Man villains would show up to fuel the overarching narratives, like Justin Hammer and Ghost. Also, it's worthy noting, just like in the actual Arrowverse, other heroes would cross over into the show as well, and would also debut in the show too, but more on that later. Tony's run will come to an end when he dies during a crossover event during 2020, but more on that later. The next show in the place of The Flash, running from 2014 to 2023, will be Spider-Man. Now, like I've mentioned, I've already made an in-depth video looking at what a Spider-Man CW show would be like, so imagine that there'd be a lot of crossover here. If you haven't seen that video, then I'll link it at the end of this one, so you can go and check it out. And because that video already exists, I won't be talking much about the show's villains and overarching stories, since those ideas are already out there in that other video. But what I will say is that I imagine during Season 3, the multiverse, just like in the actual Flash show, would become a prevalent part of the story. This would allow us to introduce characters such as Miles Morales and Spider-Gwen, who would be in the vein of Wally West and Jesse Quick. This allows for the multiverse to become wide open, which we will return to a bit later when it comes to crossover events. It also makes sense that Spider-Man is the show to follow Iron Man, since in the MCU, Tony acts as a figure of mentorship to Peter Parker, in which is actually similar to what happened in the Arrowverse between Oliver Queen and Barry Allen. The next show in the place of Supergirl, running from 2015 to 2022, will be Captain America. Now, this won't be Steve Rogers, but instead Sam Wilson. In this show, which will be set in an alternate universe to the main Ironverse, Steve Rogers will be still alive. However, he will have ascended to deal with more cosmic problems alongside the other Avengers, who will operate on the West Coast, leaving Sam Wilson to fend off New York as its sole protector. At the start of the series, Sam Wilson will still be Falcon, and similar to his character arc through the MCU, his story will be him learning and accepting the responsibility to become the new Captain America. He doesn't feel like he can live up to Steve Rogers, but has to protect New York. Hydra will be a major threat throughout the series, paralleling the military influence over the Supergirl show. Characters like Thunderbolt Ross will also have main roles throughout this show as well, which with the inclusion of other characters like Bucky, could lead to some story arcs tackling the Thunderbolts. Steve Rogers throughout the series would also cameo and guest in a few episodes, but the series will largely follow Sam and his journey. The next show in the place of Legends of Tomorrow, running from 2016 to 2022, will be a mix between the West Coast Avengers and the Young Avengers, simply titled Young Avengers. Now, in terms of direct character comparisons, the Legends are more closely resembled to the Thunderbolts when it comes to comparatively comparing them between Marvel and DC. However, since the Legends are about protecting time and the multiverse, I thought the best team to replace them with would be the Young Avengers, and it makes a lot of sense, so let me explain. This show would follow a group of heroes that all live in the shadow of the bigger heroes like Spider-Man and Iron Man. Thinking they're not up to the task, they have to band together to overcome the main villain, who of course will be Kang the Conqueror. Kang will secretly be destroying the multiverse from the inside out, and the Young Avengers will have to chase him through time and space to stop him. The team will consist of characters like Ironheart and Miles Morales, who had more sidekick roles in the other shows. The show also allows them to spread their wings, and for them to not stay in the shadow of the more popular heroes. Likewise, this show would also include characters like Kate Bishop Hawkeye, Prodigy, Iron Lad, and America Chavez, who I would imagine would all have cameoed or guest starred in a few episodes of either Iron Man or Spider-Man, with the exception of Iron Lad, who would be a character that joined the team later in the series, since he will have been a variant of Kang the Conqueror. Other characters could join the team down the line, like Kid Loki and Jane Foster's Thor, but those characters' inclusions will become more clear later down the line when I discuss crossover events. The next show in the place of Batwoman, running from 2019 to 2022, will be Miss Marvel. Although Batwoman was a lot darker than this Miss Marvel show would be, the themes are quite similar. In another alternate universe, Captain Marvel will have gone missing, and in her place, Kamala Khan has to step up and take the mantle. The story will follow the idea of self-acceptance, with Kamala wanting to be exactly like her idol, but realizing that all she has to do is be her own hero, following very closely the story that she has in the comics. The next show in the place of Black Lightning, running from 2018 to 2021, is Black Panther. It was hard to find an MCU comparison for Black Lightning, since there aren't a lot of similar characters or themes to the stories in the MCU, but I thought since Black Lightning isn't really directly involved with the Arrowverse and is only relevant during major crossovers, I thought that sounded very similar to how Wakanda and Black Panther are to the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe. Black Panther in the MCU exists on his own without the intervention of the other heroes, and I imagine this could be a self-contained story following T'Challa becoming the king and following his way to ruling his country. Of course, Wakanda would become very relevant during crossovers, but apart from that, Black Panther largely stays quiet and separate from everything else, which is, like I mentioned, similar to how Black Lightning is to the rest of the Arrowverse. There of course is other shows like Superman and Lois, Stargirl, Vixen, Constantine, and a few others, but most of them either exist in a separate universe or are too disconnected from the main Arrowverse to really include them in this list. Either way, you could imagine what these shows would be like if you used the same Marvel comparisons that I did. Now, let's move on to the thing everyone's been waiting for, the crossover events. The first crossover event is Heroes Join Forces, which is pretty simple. It's the first major team up between Iron Man and Spider-Man, and sparks the fire for all other future crossover events. I don't really know who the villain would be, it could be anyone, you guys can choose. The second crossover is where it really starts to get interesting, which is, of course, the Invasion crossover. Now, in the actual Arrowverse, Invasion is the first major crossover that saw all four major shows come together. So in the Ironverse, this of course would be Iron Man, Spider-Man, the Young Avengers, and Captain America. Taking inspiration from the MCU, since I mentioned we used it as a baseline, this will follow a similar story to the first Avengers film, where Loki will attack Earth Prime. Knowing the multiverse through the Spider-Man show, Tony enlists the help of the Young Avengers and Captain America to help fight off the invaders. Loki is defeated and Thor is introduced into the universe. This will then lead on to Jane Foster also becoming a part of the Young Avengers, followed at some point by Kid Loki down the line. However, of course, this is only a precursor to the next major crossover event, which of course in the Arrowverse was Crisis on Earth X, which in the Ironverse will be, of course, Infinity War. The heroes will unite again when Thanos strikes. However, one major change is that Tony Stark will survive the events of Avengers Endgame, and his show will continue past here. The next major crossover is smaller but still significant, Elseworlds. Elseworlds is just a fun poke at what if scenario which sees Peter Parker become Iron Man and Tony Stark become Spider-Man. In this story, we would adapt Parker Industries from the Dan Slott run, and also introduce Miss Marvel to the other characters as well. Largely, this would just be a bit of fun, but would be nowhere near as serious as the next major crossover event. The last and most prevalent crossover of them all is Crisis on Infinite Earths, which of course in the Ironverse will be Secret Wars. Now, since the MCU hasn't had this happen yet, I can't carry over those ideas, but juggling by the story from the comics, it would play out as follows. Doctor Doom hatches a plan to finally destroy all superheroes and takes them to Battleworld, including Miss Marvel, the Young Avengers, Black Panther, and Captain America. They fight it out with all the greatest villains they've ever faced, including the likes of Mandarin, the Green Goblin, and a variant of Kang. This will be the crossover where they all officially collectively call themselves the Avengers as one, and Doom will eventually be defeated. A new timeline is made in the wake of this, combining all the different universes together. However, it isn't without sacrifice, as Tony Stark loses his life, bringing an end to his story. After this, Spider-Man and a few other shows would go on to get a few more seasons, but with the Ironverse slowly dying and its popularity and ratings dropping, the CW decides to wrap things up. And with that, that is what if the MCU had its own Arrowverse. Thank you very much for watching this video, this little thought experiment. If you thought this was a bit of fun and if you liked it, then make sure to leave a comment down below what you think. Leave a like. Remember, this video is not serious in any sort of way. I'm sure if the MCU actually had its own Arrowverse, it'd be way more fleshed out than this and would be 10 times better. But like I said, it's a thought experiment. Let me know in the comments below, what would an MCU look like in the Arrowverse sort of style if you were to do it? What shows would you do, and how would you go about doing the crossover events? I want to hit all of your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe if you are new. Here are some more videos on the screen if you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, and keep writing stories.